Thanks a lot. 10 past 10. We'll try to come back to our reporter Ron Bridge later in the programme. Banking, big story around today. The banking giant UBS, that's the bank that's lost around £1.3 billion because of a suspected rogue trader, has admitted its own monitoring system did not pick up the problem. Now, Gueco Arabales has been charged with 2 counts of false accounting and 1 count of fraud. Let's talk to Jonathan Davis, an economist and wealth manager. Jonathan, good evening to you.
Hi, Stephen.
Good evening. And David Buick, a market analyst from BGC Partners. David, evening to you. Hello, David. Obviously, David will join us in a second or two when we have him. Jonathan, how do you read this then in terms of the banks being in control?
What control? $2 billion. Well, I remember when $2 billion was a lot of money. Apparently it's not these days. And I read that he lost it in relatively small amounts over the last 3 years. Now, my simple arithmetic means that must be something like $600 or $700 million a year for the last 3 years. There is absolutely no way on earth that they didn't know what was going on. And I'll tell you, if I'm wrong about that, if they didn't know what was going on...
Hold on a second. Of course they didn't know it was going on.
Well, you say of course, but they make $1 billion profit. We don't hear about it. They lose $1 billion. We hear about it. These guys are dealing with vast sums of money. I think they did know about it. However, that's by the by. If they didn't know about it, then that in itself must confirm the Vickers report from the Independent Commission on Banking to split high street banks from investment banks, because when you've got idiots like this in the city, and if they don't know what's going on, then why should the taxpayer be in hock because people like this are losing vast sums of money? Split high street from investment banking.
David Buick, market analyst with BGC Partners, with us now. David, evening to you.
Hello there.
Nice to have you with us. Are the banks actually in control, David?
Well, I don't see any. I didn't have the benefit of listening to your previous contributors' comments, but what I'd like to say is that I don't think the alleged crime is anything to do with an association of reckless banking or casino banking or whatever. This could have happened anywhere. Unfortunately, you cannot legislate for somebody who has obviously some kind of character default. The one area where I'm afraid UBS has got a lot of answering to do is how on earth, after 3 years, whereby the regulatory authorities, the compliance officers, the credit people are now the most important appointees in any bank, how did this crime, for want of a better expression, get under the wire? How come, since 2008, that they weren't in a position to identify these rogue trades? That's the question we all want to have answered.
Well, precisely. And what do you think has gone on here? The systems clearly are not tight enough. And if they're not tight enough at this institution, are they tight enough at other banking institutions?
I have reason to believe there is. I don't think you would recognise, to be perfectly candid, the quality of regulation, the quality of compliance now in comparison to what it was 3 years ago. It has been absolutely 300% improvement. And the only thing your previous speaker did say, which I have to slightly repudiate, if this was a British bank, he would have a very strong case. UBS, the taxpayer wouldn't be asked for any money at all. But that is making a trite comment, which I don't want to make at all. As far as I'm personally concerned, there are serious questions to be answered as regards regulation of how on earth this got under the wire. But I don't believe it's anything to do with casino banking at all. It could have been anything. It could have been testosterone. It could have been vengeance. It could have been just malicious criminality. It could have been any number of issues. And until we know more about it, and we're all in the allegation stage now because nobody's admitted anything, we need to know exactly how it and what happened since 2008. It's 3 years now.
Grant Anderson with us this evening, a former markets analyst, now the author of City Boy and Just Business. That adrenaline and that testosterone that was being referred to there by David Garrett. Tell us how that happens in this type of situation. What's it like to be in the thick of it?
Well, it is a time of enormous testosterone. Very much, the very features that are encouraged in the city and are rewarded actually make ideal rogue traders. So the arrogance that's required, the taking of risks, the gambling, the hyper-competitiveness, that is exactly what the city banks tend to reward. And more important than anything is the unwillingness to accept defeat. I've had my own sort of small loss at a time about 4 years into my city career. It was only 1.2 million or so, which is nothing compared to this. But believe me, the only thing to do was theoretically to stick to your guns, tell everyone, look, I'm right, they'll see. And in this particular event where I estimated that a share price decline would be about 5 pence and it ended up being about £1, my trader lost a hell of a lot of money. I was in the pits of despair, but believe me, I was giving the impression that everything was just tickety-boo.
And so what were you doing? Were you chasing your losses?
Well, it's essentially a company called Scottish Power had a power station explode in the year 2000. I tried to estimate how much that would be. I told the trader once the share price was down about 10p that he had to fill his boots. Then the share price was down 15, 20. I kept up this facade. I was in total despair. I thought my city career was coming to a premature end. And the one thing you cannot show in the banks is weakness. It's failure. Defeat is not an option. You believe you're a genius. You try and make sure that everyone knows that's the case, and you therefore keep sticking to your guns, and it can become a terribly, terribly time of despair, which is what it was for me briefly.
Can I look at the other big story that's around? Really, really interesting territory, this. Jonathan Davis, let's start with you. You're an economist, you're a wealth manager. The state of the economy at the minute, the state of the euro at the moment, and what we're facing.
As far as I'm concerned, we are in a 20-year depression. We are making all the wrong mistakes. We're continually bailing out banks. When they talk about bailing out Greece and Spain and Portugal, they're not bailing out the countries. They're bailing out the reckless lenders who loaned to these countries at the same rate of interest that they loaned to much stronger Germany. Thus, the bankers should be let go. Their business model is kaput. They're bringing our economy down. They're bringing the global economy down. Look at Japan, 23 years in depression and counting. We must stop bailing out banks today.
And David Buick, if you look at what Gordon Brown, did you see this in the Telegraph today? He's warning that Europe's fast escalating crisis is now more dangerous than the Lehman Brothers disaster 3 years ago. He says it threatens to tip the West into a 1930-style slump unless global leaders work together to take dramatic action.
Well, first and foremost, there's not much that I have to credit Gordon Brown with over the last 13 years, though in fairness to him, between 2008 and 2010, in the circumstances, I thought the previous administration did an excellent job rescuing the situation. Well, you can have your laugh at the moment, but let me just finish first. The one thing I find myself staggered is agreeing with him that I believe that debt is the greatest threat to democracy in the course of the next 20 years. And even though your fellow guest holds me in derision, I actually agree with him on that.
So what do you predict for the future here?
Well, until these European politicians wake up and smell the coffee and stop passing the buck and asking the central banks to provide plenty of liquidity while they contemplate their oversized navels, and not actually come up with an assessment of what needs to be done, have a 5 or 10-year plan, which has to mean less borrowing by the consumer, less borrowing by banks, and less borrowing by governments. And that has to be the goal
but of course,
for the next 5 to 10 years.
Not too many of us are old enough to actually have lived through the 1930s. Some of us have read about it. Spell out for us, Jonathan Davis, what the 1930s actually meant for people and what it could mean for us.
Well, first of all, I think we're in a situation worse than the 1930s because the 30s succeeded by then the biggest debt bubble in history. We now have a debt bubble which is even bigger in percentage terms than the late 1920s. Unfortunately, it meant significant poverty, the wiping out of the middle classes, massive losses of wealth, huge unemployment. But my point is, we're basically doing exactly the same as we did in the 1930s. We kept on bailing out the banks. We kept on spending money on ridiculous projects. We kept on printing money. You cannot get out of debt by borrowing more debt. What we need to do is let the banks go down because they are overwhelming us with debt. We need to have a couple of years of recession. That will bring prices down. That will get us in a state where I believe we can then have 20 years of growth. This way, finally, this way, we're in 20 years of depression.
But of course, David, when Jonathan talks about let the banks go down, what happens to the money of small and medium-sized businesses? And I choose businesses because, of course, the government guarantee £85,000 of protection at the minute. But if you've got a smaller or medium-sized business and they're holding their cash flow in a bank, if these banks go down, what happens to the money?
Well, 2 points I'd like to make. First and foremost, I think it's wrong for Jonathan to compare apples with pears. In 1929, there was 25% unemployment. Well, where we are in the mature world, the worst we've got is about 9.2%. We've also got a much more mature economy because we've got a massive contribution from China, India, and other emerging nations, which will help alleviate the pain. But to try and answer your question of what we actually have to do, we had a wake-up call in 2007, 2008. We had the banks saved because when Hank Paulson pulled the trigger on Lehman Brothers, what he didn't obviously realize, or others, was the incredible damage that he was doing to the whole system, having bailed out Bear Stearns before and then allowed the support to the tune of $180 billion for AIG and also for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae.
No.
I don't believe that, just let me finish very quickly, I don't believe that the system is quite as acutely in trouble as it was before. I think it could do if the European Union leaders don't wake up and smell the coffee and realise what the problem is.
Well, you've got George Osborne saying that time is running out for Eurozone leaders.
I agree with him.
To save the single currency. You've got the US Treasury Secretary. Now, that was a blunt warning from him. He has said that European leaders are failing to deal with what he called the catastrophic financial risks posed by the Eurozone debt crisis. Now, what I'd like to know from you, the experts tonight, a catastrophic financial risk. What does that mean to ordinary people? How will that affect our lives?
Higher unemployment.
Yep.
There's no question. It means a Great Depression. Of that, there's no doubt. What my point is, I see that we're in depression anyway. And I'm saying if we take the short, sharp shock to the system, we can come out of it within a couple of years. If we take David Buick, the city's view, we will be in this mire for the next 20 years.
What is my view, Jonathan? I think you must have misinterpreted what I said. I agree with you about debt. I agree with you that no other bank should be ever allowed to be saved again. I completely concur with that. Where do you think my policy is different from yours?
Let me just pause for a second or two. Tonight. We'll take your calls, by the way, 0500 909 693, the text 85058, the email nolan@bbc.co.uk. The final one-day international is coming to an end in Cardiff. Here's Pat Murphy.
We're into overtime here, Stephen. England need just a couple of runs to win. It will be a thrilling victory. One need, in fact, 11 balls to go. They're 240 for 4 in the 33rd over. The story really in the last half an hour is Johnny Bairstow. He's 21 years of age, making his debut for England. His father, David, played for England as well. Bairstow has smashed 41 of 21 balls. He hit 6 off his 5th ball in international cricket. He and Ravi Bopara are going to win this game against the odds. It'll be a tremendous performance because India must have felt they were home and hose when these two came together with 75 needed off the final 8 overs. And just as I speak, England have won the match. Ravi Bopara ends 36 not out. And Jonathan Bairstow, what a terrific innings from the young man. Jonathan Bairstow has won this game in thrilling fashion. At the age of 21, you have no fear, do you? And what a great day for him. He probably won't sleep tonight, Stephen. England have won by 6 wickets.
Pat, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to David Buick, market analyst from BGC Partners, Jonathan Davis, an economist and wealth manager. So again, walk me through this, David, please. So if Greece is to default on its debts...
Greece will default.
What happens then? Is it forced out of the Eurozone?
The thing is, to come out of the Eurozone without giving adequate notice would be a financial catastrophe, which I don't even want to think about.
Why?
For the simple reason that everybody is intertwined with the debt situation. So if you suddenly stop and cut the Eurozone out and say it doesn't work anymore, you go back to the Deutschmark, the French franc, the drachma, the scudo, all that sort of thing, it would be absolutely catastrophic because the level of control between each other. I'm advocating the fact that people need to wake up and realize that Greece, they can't even spell tax. It's got one syllable. Nobody pays it. And how you can expect a country to provide growth and make cuts of that nature when you see all these people in the streets of Athens, it can't happen. So we need to wake up and realize that everybody who owns Greek debt has to take a haircut, i.e. a loss. And then we have to appropriate this debt over a much longer period of time, and at the same time, over a period of 5 to 10 years, allow the European Union to issue Euro bonds. If you're not going to do that, then for goodness sakes tell us now what you're going to do as an alternative, like are you going to give Greece 3 years to get out of the marketplace? Are you going to give Spain and Italy the same sort of period? It's just that everybody within the European Union has got its own agenda. You can't blame Germany and France for saying we don't want to finance other people's financial incompetence. I have some sympathy, and both countries know that Merkel and Sarkozy would lose an election if it was held tomorrow by a landslide, and they're not having it. So, this is where we've got the problem. We have served notice on this stuff for 3 years now, and until the European politicians actually come to a unanimity of purpose of what they're going to do, we're going to go on going into great problems.
And how exposed are we in this country, David?
Very adequately, thanks very much indeed. Not only Greece, people have got huge holdings of Italian bonds. Many of them are held more domestically. They've got holdings in Spanish bonds. And, we have got massive exposure in these areas. And, as far as I'm concerned, this is political abrogation of responsibility. These guys chose in 1951, when the European Coal and Steel Community was set up, they wanted it for the defense of the world. They wanted it for economic purposes. They wanted it for commercial purposes, financial purposes. Okay, you got it. But how they could ever think that either 16 or 27 countries could sing or dance from the same hymn sheet when they've got separate agendas, I'll never know.
Jonathan Davis, I guess the instinct of most people listening to this programme tonight will be, look, Armageddon financially, it's not going to happen. It's not going to destroy lives here in the UK. We're too big to fail.
People and governments for decades, always it's been a case of something will come up. Well, let me take you back to the 70s when we had near 25% inflation, near 20% interest rates. Just ponder on that, near 20% interest rates. In the last 3 or 4 decades, inflation and interest rates have fallen, not in a straight line, until we've had negative inflation a couple of years ago. And of course, we have the lowest interest rates in 400 years of the Bank of England. And they pretty well literally can't go any lower. In other words, falling interest rates always bailed people out. And then on top of that, over the last few decades, we had more spend in the public sector. And on top of that, the banks were allowed to run roughshod over the rules and lend. In other words, we've had easy money and lower cost money for decades. Politicians and the households that you're talking about, they've always kicked the can down the line. Something will always come up. Do you know what? We're at the end of the line. That's why countries are going bankrupt. There's nowhere else to turn. I go back to my statement. We either have 2 years of hard recession followed by growth, or we have 20 years of depression. And that's what the politicians are doing to us right now.
And of course, David, a lot of these decisions will be on a macro level. They will be for governments to decide, and clearly people can discuss it among themselves. On an actual practical level, for people that do have money in the banks, for example, there's no need for them to worry, is there?
I don't think so, no. Because, I know, I mean, when I heard about this rogue trade yesterday, I thought, oh my word, this is the last thing that London needs when it's building itself up to be the biggest financial centre in the world again. And there's been some arguments that we've been having, obviously, with the Vickers Independent Banking Commission and all the bleeding hearts out there, you know, I've got to say, there you are, I told you so. This is nothing to do with it. But I have to honestly say that I actually think our UK banks are, now that we've sorted out the Royal Bank of Scotland in terms of where the problems are and how they lie, Lloyds and HBOS, I think they're in a lot better shape than they were in 2008, and I have to extol the virtues of the Bank of England. I think Sir Mervyn King, Paul Tucker, Andy Haldane and Charlie Bean have done an amazing job in very difficult circumstances. And I'm very much more upbeat than Jonathan is, but I wholly agree with what Jonathan says, that if these European politicians don't do what they have to do, which is to make sure that these debts are cut substantially and periods of austerity go through for the next couple of years, we are in big trouble.
Can you define, sorry, 1 second, Jonathan, define big trouble?
I think you could see, you know, we've got unemployment in this country now, whatever it is, at 5.5% or whatever it is. It's 9.1% in, you know, in the United States of America. It's around 7 and 8% in Germany. Talk about 12, 15%, and that equals, in my opinion, anarchy. 12,
15% unemployment?
If you don't get this right, you are going to have some serious problems, because what people have done, which Jonathan has said, is they've overextended themselves with cheap money. And they've borrowed and bought houses they can't afford. They've got stuff on their credit card. Every time I see some spotty youth go into some coffee shop with his credit card and has a double tall semi-skimmed cappuccino, and he sticks his piece of plastic in the machine, I'm saying to myself, he can't afford that. And it's not a cash card either. And this is what worries me.
And when Jonathan Davis, George Osborne, says time is running out, how much time have we got here?
I think Greece, which is the current issue, is probably going to default formally within weeks. And that is going to create havoc for the euro itself. I think the euro will probably go down 10, 20, 30%. And indeed, if Greece leaves the euro, then they'll go back to the drachma, and the Greek currency will go down 50, 60, 70%. And then, of course, once Greece does it, then Ireland may well do it. Portugal and Italy, well, Italy is 10 times the size of Lehman Brothers. In other words, it's how long? It started. It's already started. David talks about our banks are in pretty good shape. Can I put that into relative context? As far as I understand, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but the British banks have, they call them assets, it's actually loans, of 4.5 times the size of the UK economy. And much of these assets, as well as being loaned to countries which cannot pay the money back, are also loaned on commercial and residential property in the UK, which is vastly overvalued. In other words, there's going to be a massive collapse in property in due course. You come from Northern Ireland, Stephen. Residential property is down 47% in Northern Ireland and in other parts of the country as well. And now that the city is in a state, an era of deleveraging, whereas for decades it's been higher and higher lending, now it's reduced lending. Now that the city is in deleveraging, which will continue for years, that's going to affect the south of England economy, which is going to affect house prices and commercial property. In other words, the banks are going to go down yet again.
And final word to you, David Buick. Has he exaggerated that massively?
Yes, but what I hope he's trying to do being the responsible citizen, is a wake-up call. And I think this government has realised that if we don't do something about the size of the debt which we have, and that has been proven, Stephen, because look, for 10-year money, we pay about 2.2%. It's 5.5% for Spain and Italy, and it's 25% over 10 years for Greece. So the case rests.
David, thank you. Jonathan Davis, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring you the latest news now at 10:35.